Hey there! Tonight we're going to take a slow, dusty walk down the banks of the Nile to a place shimmering with myth, but built on sweat sunburn and the kind of manual labor that makes your fingers ache just thinking about it. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of towering pyramids. Sacred cats and gods with animal heads who judged you long after your last breath. But behind the limestone grandeur and golden masks lies something most people don't picture when they think of ancient glory. Extreme heat, no privacy, and an ongoing war against sand in your nose, your food, your sandals. If you're lucky enough to have any, let's ask the real question tonight. What if you had to survive just one day in ancient Egypt? Not as a pharaoh or a high priest. Those roles are already filled, but as a regular person. The kind who wakes up with mosquito bites, works until their back gives out, and tries not to get cursed along the way. Spoiler alert, the sun isn't the only thing trying to roast you alive. So before we begin, go ahead and dim your lights, maybe turn on a soft fan or your favorite background hum. If you enjoy these nighttime journeys back into history, the calm ones, the weird ones, the slightly cursed ones, consider liking the video and subscribing. It helps more than you know. And I'd love to hear in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always beautiful to see who else is winding down under the same moonlight. Now settle in. This journey doesn't start with pyramids or pharaohs. It starts with you, waking up inside a clay and reed oven that some ancient scribe kindly called a house. Your body is sticky even before you open your eyes. The air is thick with heat that clings to your skin like wet parchment, and the faint scent of straw mildew and ash tells you you're still very much inside your own home, or what passes for it. The structure creaks around you, made from mud bricks and reeds sun-dried and crumbling in the corners. There's no real door, just a cloth flap, and definitely no windows. Airflow. That's what the gods invented fans for if you were rich enough to own a servant to wave one. But you are not. The first sensation that registers is that your back hurts. You've been sleeping on a straw mat over dirt flooring, and your pillow is actually a carved headrest made of wood or stone. It's shaped like a little bridge and designed allegedly to support your neck while keeping scorpions from crawling into your ears. Comfort was never part of the equation. If it gets you through the night without venom or curses, it's doing its job. The second sensation is the sun. You haven't even made it out of bed yet, and already the desert sun is trying to kill you. Light slashes through the gaps in your roof like golden knives, and the temperature is rising faster than you can sweat. It's maybe 6:30 a.m. and already pushing 90 degrees Fahrenheit over 32 Celsius. No curtains, no blinds, no mercy. By the time you sit up, your linen sheet is soaked. You're not ill. You're simply alive in ancient Egypt. The thin, fraying tunic you slept in sticks to your skin like damp gauze, but changing into another outfit. Not really an option. Most Egyptians had only one or two garments at a time, and even those wore down fast. That stylish white linen you see in hieroglyphics looks great on temple walls. In real life, it's more like tissue paper that's been through too many wash cycles. You step onto the earthen floor and dust kicks up around your toes. You haven't even walked outside yet, but your feet are already gritty. There's no toilet, no sink, no getting ready. Routine, your hygiene kit, consists of a clay jug of lukewarm water, if you remember to refill it yesterday, and maybe if you're lucky, a bit of natron, the naturally occurring salt Egyptians used to cleanse the body and also incidentally to preserve corpses. That tingling sensation. It's not freshness. It's mild dehydration. Somewhere outside, a rooster is screaming, not crowing. Screaming because the heat is already making everyone uncomfortable. Chickens, dogs, children, and flies start up their morning chorus of chaos. You shuffle to the doorway, push aside the cloth flap, and get your first taste of morning air, which, spoiler, is not much different than indoor air. Still hot, still dusty, still aggressively Egyptian. Now, if this were a travel documentary, this is the part where a narrator would talk about the golden morning light, illuminating the timeless beauty of the Nile. But you don't live in a travel documentary. You live in a mud brick box with straw in your hair and sand in places sand should never be. And you're already sweating through your only tunic. As you squint into the sun, something strange happens. You start to feel dry even as you sweat. That's the desert air pulling the moisture out of your skin faster than you can replace it. It's like standing inside a convection oven, except you're the main course. You wonder if it's possible to get a sunburn before breakfast. It is. And this is just the beginning. The day ahead involves labor dirt mystery ailments and possibly curses depending on your employer and how bad your luck runs. You'll need to hydrate constantly, which would be easier if your water didn't come from a river shared with hippos, crocodiles, and every family in the village. You'll need to walk barefoot through scorching paths, ration your shade, and maybe smear yourself with something disgusting just to survive the morning. Because in ancient Egypt, your survival kit includes not just willpower, but mud prayer and an uncomfortable relationship with animal waste. Historians still debate exactly how tolerable daily life was for commoners during the New Kingdom and later periods. Some argue that access to the Nile and relative climate stability made farming life relatively predictable. Others point to skeletal remains, showing signs of severe arthritis and malnutrition, even among children. One thing's for sure, surviving a single day here meant waking up ready to endure before the gods ever got around to judging you. And that was just waking up. You step outside, and the first thing that greets you is not the sound of birdsong or the scent of morning dew. No, it's the feeling of a gritty breeze whispering up your nose, stinging your eyes and lodging itself inside your ears before you've even taken 3 steps. Sand. The ever-present, always clinging, completely inescapable nemesis of everyone who's ever tried to live along the Nile. It's not just in the air, it's in the atmosphere. It's in the folds of your tunic. It's in your scalp, your fingernails, your drinking water, and depending on how unlucky you are, your breakfast. The ground outside your hut is not a street. It's a packed down trail of dry earth and loose grit pounded into submission by years of bare feet and livestock hooves. A few other villagers are already out and about, stirring quietly like sleepwalkers, their heads draped with linen cloths or makeshift hoods in a vain attempt to block the oncoming heat. Children chase each other barefoot through the dirt, kicking up plumes of powdery dust that swirl around your legs and find their way somehow always into your sandals, or worse, between your teeth. You reach down and rub your eye, which only makes it worse. There's no mirror, but you can feel it, one gritty particle lodged perfectly under your eyelid like some microscopic blade. You blink, trying to flush it out with tears, but that just draws more dust in. This is your daily ritual. You haven't had a clean face since sometime around 1300 BCE. Not because you're lazy, but because the very air fights you. There are no showers. There's no such thing as hopping into a bath before heading out. Most homes, especially those outside the elite class, don't have dedicated washrooms. If you want to clean yourself, you walk to the communal water source, a clay basin in the center of town or the river. If you're lucky, and splash your face, hoping the river gods are in a good mood, and no parasites are feeling adventurous that morning. If you do wash, the dust will return in minutes. And if you don't, well, no one will notice because they look just like you, sunburned, sweaty, and slightly beige from the neck down. Sand, by the way, is not soft. It's not the fine golden powder you see in luxury travel ads. It's coarser here, sometimes sharp, sometimes sticky, always aggressive. The kind that scratches your skin, scrapes your pottery, and slowly wears down the soles of your feet, until even calluses start to complain. It wedges into the seams of your woven reed sandals, until they squeak like worn-out rope. It infiltrates your sleeping mat, your cooking tools, and your sense of personal boundaries. There is no brushing it off, only surrender. Historians have often marveled at how ancient Egyptians lived in such proximity to the desert without being swallowed by it. The truth is they were swallowed by it. Slowly. Every day. Their buildings, their clothing, even their writings reflect a kind of daily negotiation with this persistent force. Some texts from tomb walls reference the sandstorms as divine punishments, or warnings from the gods. Other records describe men and women so accustomed to the environment that they learn to see by squinting through it, letting their eyes adapt to the hazy sting of midday. You shuffle toward the workyard, passing a line of sun-cracked water jars propped against a shaded wall. One of them is yours if you remembered to fill it. It's not like you can just turn on a faucet and expect cold-filtered hydration. You drink what's stored and refill only when you trek to the Nile with a ceramic jug on your shoulder. And when you do, the water you collect is neither cold nor clean. Or it's river water shared with cattle crocodiles, and the washing of laundry and limbs. Some villages try to strain it through linen. Others just hope for the best. There's a grainy layer at the bottom of every jar. You've stopped noticing it. That's not sediment. That's sand, and it never goes away. You might say your water is mineral-rich if you're being generous, or earthy if you're in denial. Every sip carries a hint of yesterday's heat and today's dust. Now you might be wondering if there was any way people in ancient Egypt kept clean, and the answer is yes, but clean is relative. Natron, the natural salt used in embalming, also served as a kind of soap for the living. People would mix it with water to cleanse their skin, their hair, even their clothes. But it was drying. Very drying. Like flake your skin off drying. Add to that the fact that you only have so much linen, and you can't exactly pop over to a dry cleaner. And you begin to understand why Egyptians preferred loose, breathable garments. They were easier to shake the sand out of, and they stuck less when soaked in sweat. Your scalp itches. Not from lice, although that's certainly a possibility, but from the layer of fine dust that has now permanently taken up residence between your follicles. Ancient Egyptians commonly shaved their heads, men and women alike, not out of fashion, but out of practicality. Wigs were optional. Comfort was not. If you had the means, you'd keep your hair cropped close, or gone entirely, which made things easier when applying perfumed oils or salves meant to cool the skin. But again, that was for the wealthy. You get to scratch. The wind picks up. Not strong, but enough to scatter a few palm fronds and rustle the hanging pots in the neighbor's courtyard. That little gust brings a new flurry of powder into the air, and you instinctively duck your face into the crook of your arm. You've learned the hard way. Breathe too deeply in a dusty breeze, and you'll spend the next hour coughing like a man twice your age. Your throat already feels like someone took a mortar and pestle to it. You try to clear it with a swallow, but your mouth is dry and your tongue is coated with a fine layer of grainy regret. By mid-morning, the soles of your feet are already sore. You haven't walked more than a few hundred yards, but every step wears at you like sandpaper. This is normal. You've been barefoot most of your life. Sandals are reserved for rituals, special occasions, or temple visits. Even those are rudimentary, woven from palm fiber or leather scraps. If they break, you repair them or go without. No one's handing out replacements, and no one's sympathetic to your blisters. You look down at your legs already dusty despite a morning rinse. You could scrub all day and never be clean. The word doesn't really exist here the way it does in the modern world. There's no scent of lavender soap, no sanitized surfaces. You carry the earth with you, always on your skin, in your lungs, in your very posture. Even the architecture around you seems resigned to the dust. Mud brick walls are streaked with wind-blown grit, their surfaces pocked and faded. Painted reliefs, once bright and vibrant, now wear a matte finish of silt. Nothing is immune. Not your home, not your food, not your lungs. You don't live next to the desert, you live inside it. Quirky as it may sound, the sand was also seen as protective in some religious contexts. Some Egyptians believed that sleeping close to the earth on the sand itself, offered spiritual grounding. It connected the body to the land, to the ancestors, to the gods of the Nile who watched over every grain and gust. Of course, those beliefs don't help when you've just inhaled half a dune trying to sneeze. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians had any effective ways of controlling indoor dust. Archaeological digs suggest that homes were swept regularly with reed brooms, and some wealthier households may have used fine cloth to cover food or beds. But even the cleanest homes, based on residue analysis, had multiple layers of windborne particulates embedded in the walls, which is a fancy way of saying yes, everyone lived in dust. Your nose starts to itch again. You sniffle. The itch travels to your throat, then your eyes. You sneeze. And for a brief, horrifying moment, you feel sand between your teeth, like biting into a gritty fig. You don't know where it came from. You don't care. You've stopped asking. This is your life now, a delicate ballet between enduring the elements and pretending you're not slowly turning into a human terracotta sculpture. And yet you adapt. You always do. Just like the millions who came before you, farmers, potters, brickmakers, fishermen, scribes. People who worked the land, built the temples, raised children, buried their dead, and honored the gods, all while blinking through a haze of sand that never quite cleared. This is just one morning in Egypt, and you're only getting started. You step further out into the morning light, and it feels like the sun has moved closer overnight. There's a faint smell in the air, something earthy and strange like wet clay, mixed with smoke and something else. It takes a moment to register, but you know it well by now. It's the smell of ancient Egyptian sunscreen. Except it's not sunscreen as you know it. There's no bottle with bright orange branding, no coconut scent, no SPF rating. What you're smelling, what your neighbors are probably rubbing onto their arms right now, is a concoction made from thick mud-pulverized minerals. And for those living closer to the marshes, something a little more personal: crocodile dung. Yes, really. In ancient Egypt, protection from the sun wasn't optional. It was survival. The average person worked outside all day under one of the most brutal suns on earth. And while linen clothing helped a little, it did very little to stop UV rays. So people adapted. The wealthy had access to protective salves and oils made from ingredients like castor sesame and moringa. These were mixed with scented resins or beeswax to make them easier to apply. But for the average villager or laborer, that kind of luxury was out of reach. Instead, you reach for what's available: wet clay from the riverbank, mixed with sand and whatever oily substance might stick to your skin. And in some regions, especially those close to the water, where crocodiles roamed, people genuinely used crocodile dung as part of their sun and insect protection ritual. Some historians believe the dung's thick, paste-like consistency formed a physical barrier on the skin, while others suggest it may have held symbolic value, linking the wearer to Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of strength and protection. You're not thinking about the theology, though. You're just trying not to smell like you slept inside an animal. The dung, when fresh, is pungent. When dried, it hardens and flakes off like the rest of your dignity. But it keeps your shoulders from blistering, and that's enough. As you rub a thin layer of clay across your forearms, you can feel it cool your skin for a moment. A small breeze sends a ripple of relief through your clothes, which are already sticking to you in places linen was never meant to cling. Your tunic, plain and threadbare, is barely doing its job. And the scarf wrapped around your head isn't for style. It's the only thing protecting your scalp from frying. The sun here doesn't rise, it lunges. You've barely had a moment to hydrate, and already it feels like your back is sizzling under the linen. You squint at the horizon. The light bounces off every surface, even the mud brick walls. Everything seems to glow slightly gold, everything except you. You just glisten. Now, in case you're wondering why no one built permanent shade structures for daily use, here's your answer. Most public labor happened in open spaces, and shade was a privilege, not a right. Builders, farmers, fishermen, potters, None of them had parasols. Large structures like temples or palace courts had awnings or colonnades that provided brief shelter, but outside of that, you learned to survive under direct sunlight. Historical records and wall paintings often depict workers toiling with cloth wrapped around their heads, sometimes their faces. These were practical adaptations, not fashion choices. In tombs, artisans depicted themselves in the midst of labor, often shirtless or minimally dressed, crouched under the weight of tools or baskets. The lines on their backs weren't just stylistic flourishes. They were records of pain. You pause for a moment and glance toward a nearby palm tree. Its shadow is long and narrow, and already claimed by 3 children crouched in the dirt, sharing a bowl of grain mash. There's no space for you. Besides, standing still means thinking too much, and you've still got a job to do today, one that requires stamina focus, and just the right balance of heat stroke prevention and ritual appeasement. As you prepare to leave, you take a final step into your sun defense routine eye makeup. That's right, this isn't about looking pretty. The dark kohl you apply around your eyes is medicinal, protective, and practical. The thick black line helps reduce glare from the sun, much like athletes today use dark paint beneath their eyes. But there's more to it than that. The kohl, made from galena, a naturally occurring lead-based mineral, had antibacterial properties. Studies of ancient samples have confirmed that this mixture could help fight off eye infections, which were common in such a dusty, bright environment. You take a small stick and smear the kohl into place. Your hand is steady. You've done this 1,000 times. Everyone has. It's not vanity, it's vision. There's a quiet moment as you walk through the open yard, stepping carefully over uneven stones weaving around a cart stacked with dried reeds. A donkey brays in the distance, and a group of women pass by carrying jugs balanced on their heads with practiced ease. Their faces are painted too less for style, more for survival. Even animals here are decorated for protection. Sacred cats often wore tiny amulets. Children sometimes had their heads shaved, except for one lock of hair meant to ward off illness. And you, smelling faintly of clay coal and crocodile, you are part of that same logic. It's not a beauty routine. It's a prayer. The sun climbs higher, and you can feel it pressing on your shoulders like a physical weight. If you had a mirror, you'd probably see your skin already flushing, your lips beginning to crack. You reach into your bag, a reed pouch slung across your shoulder, and pull out a small jar of oil. It's almost empty. You rub the last bit on your elbows where the linen tunic has already started to wear thin. Historical accounts from Greek observers like Herodotus often describe the Egyptians as fastidiously clean, bathing daily and oiling their bodies. And it's true for those with means. The upper classes maintained hygiene routines involving scented oils, fine linens, and daily cleansing. But for the average person, a sliver of soapstone and a jar of castor oil had to last a long time. You pass by the edge of the neighborhood heading toward the work site. The light is harsh, and you have to squint constantly, blinking against the dry brightness that never goes away. It's not just a question of endurance. It's a question of survival. How long can your skin hold out? How many more hours until the sun moves? How much longer until you can sit, rest, and remove the layer of gunk caked across your chest? Historians still debate how widespread the use of protective mixtures like dung-based salves actually was. Some argue that such practices were localized or ritualistic, not daily habits. Others suggest they were much more common than the records show, simply because such materials don't preserve well over time. What is clear, however, is that personal protection against the elements was not just a matter of comfort. It was deeply embedded in cultural and spiritual belief systems. The line between practicality and devotion was thin, often blurred. And so you keep walking, past the palm trees, past the braying livestock, past the women at the well who glance at your face and nod with recognition, not at you, but at the ritual painted around your eyes. They do it too. Everyone does. Because in a world without sunscreen, where the sun is a deity and the desert is alive, you don't just guard your skin, you armor your soul. You don't remember the last time breakfast was something to look forward to. There are no eggs sizzling in a pan, no sweet pastries waiting on the table, and certainly no coffee. Just the familiar ache in your stomach, and the knowledge that whatever you eat this morning will be dry, dense, and probably full of sand. You reach the shaded corner of your courtyard, where a cracked clay bowl waits on a flat stone surface. Inside bread, or something pretending to be it. The bread is dark and heavy-shaped into a rough oval, with charred edges and a leathery crust. You pick it up, and it bends slightly, not because it's soft, but because it's overloaded with moisture from the humid clay oven, where it was baked probably yesterday. You tear off a bite and chew. It's tough sour and filled with tiny grit that grinds against your teeth. You wince. That's not a flaw. That's normal. Bread in ancient Egypt was made from emmer wheat or barley ground between stone mills that over time contributed particles of quartz and grit to the flour. Every meal slowly but surely eroded the teeth of an entire population. Skeletal remains found in tombs confirm this Egyptian suffered from severe toothware abscesses and jaw infections from chewing through thousands of sandy meals. Not from sugar, not from candy, from the very grain that kept them alive. Next to your bread sits a clay cup, half filled with beer. Not the kind you drink after work while watching the sunset. This is more of a porridge. Thick, cloudy, and barely fermented. Ancient Egyptian beer was made by fermenting loaves of bread in water, which sounds exactly as appetizing as it tastes. But it's nutritious, filled with calories mild in alcohol, and safe enough to drink when river water might make you ill. Even children drink it. Even babies watered down with mash. You take a sip and feel it coat your throat. It's warm and flat, but it goes down easy. One cup will get you through the morning at least until the sun climbs higher, and the idea of food becomes laughable. You dunk the rest of your bread in the beer, softening it just enough to chew without grinding your molars into powder. This is not a meal. This is maintenance. Your body needs fuel, and this is the only kind it's getting. A neighbor walks by carrying a woven basket on their hip, covered with a linen cloth. You can smell the mash even from here, slightly sour with a hint of ash and burned grain. They're probably heading to the communal oven, a large clay dome shared by several families who take turns baking their bread. If they're lucky, their loaves will bake evenly. If not, the outside burns while the inside stays raw. Either way, it's food. You walk toward the oven out of habit, nodding to the two women squatting beside it. One of them is fanning the flames with a reed fan, sending bursts of heat into the air. The other kneads dough on a stone slab, her hands white with flour and ash. A small child crouches nearby, poking the coals with a stick. No one speaks much. It's too hot already, and everyone knows what comes next. You glance down at the floor of the oven yard. It's littered with husks of burned grain and little piles of sand. No one bothers to sweep. It'll be back in minutes. You remember hearing once that the word for sand had dozens of meanings in ancient Egyptian fine sand. River sand, dune sand, sacred sand. You don't know if that's true, but it feels right. You've tasted all of them by now. A small, flat loaf is handed to you, still warm. You thank them and move back toward the shade, sitting on a low stool made from bundled papyrus stems. You take another bite, this one slightly better than before, if only because it's fresher. You chew slowly, letting your jaw rest between bites. Chewing is work, and today you'll need your strength. Mainstream historical records confirm that bread and beer were the cornerstones of the Egyptian diet, regardless of class. What changed was the quality. The wealthy had finely ground flour honey spices, sometimes even fruit or meat mixed in. Commoners had coarse mash overworked grain, and ovens often shared with rats. Cooking tools were basic grinding stones, clay ovens, wooden paddles, and sanitation. Let's just say if you dropped your dough, you probably just picked it up and brushed it off. You glance across the yard to a pile of discarded dough, dried and cracked in the sun. A dog is sniffing at it, its ribs visible through a patchy coat. It looks at you once and moves on. Even dogs have standards. You finish your meal in silence. There's no ritual here, just hunger. Your stomach settles a little, but you can feel the grit sticking in your gums, like the last insult of the morning. You swish some water around your mouth from a nearby jug, trying to rinse it out, but it doesn't help much. You don't remember the last time your teeth felt truly clean. There's a saying among the workers: if it crunches, it's fresh. You're not sure if it started as a joke or a coping mechanism, but you find yourself repeating it anyway. Because sometimes you need to laugh quietly under your breath, through a mouthful of gravel-flavored bread. As you stand to leave, you feel your knees pop the joints stiff from crouching on hard stone. You stretch your back already sore before the day has even truly begun. This isn't about nutrition. It's about durability. You are a machine fueled by carbohydrates and habit. Historians still argue about the exact nutritional content of ancient Egyptian food. Some evidence suggests it was balanced whole grains, legumes, seasonal vegetables. Other findings point to malnutrition, especially among the laboring classes. The answer likely lies in seasonality. When harvests were good, there was variety. When they failed, bread and beer were the only constants. You walk back toward the road past homes still asleep, past courtyards where fires are being stoked. The heat is building. Your stomach is no longer empty, but your energy feels borrowed. The work ahead is heavy, and the sun is only getting brighter. Breakfast is over. Survival continues. The ground beneath your feet is already warm, like a clay plate left too long in the sun. You hesitate before stepping forward, but there's no real choice. Work doesn't wait for comfort. You cross the threshold of your yard and onto the narrow path that serves as a village road, if you can call a dusty corridor between sun-baked walls a road. It's uneven, packed with stones and ancient foot grooves, worn in by generations, and worst of all, it's barefoot terrain. Your soles have long since thickened into a kind of armor, rough and calloused like old bark. But armor cracks, and today the path is especially punishing. There's something sharp lodged in the dirt ahead, a jagged shell fragment, maybe a thorn or even a broken chip of ceramic. You avoid it at the last second, shifting your weight, with the kind of precision that only years of walking barefoot can teach. There's no scream, no dramatic moment, just the quiet recognition that one wrong step could ruin your whole day. Shoes exist, of course, sandals made of papyrus leather or woven reeds, but most people don't wear them regularly. They're precious, and they don't last long. They're reserved for rituals, temple visits, or funerals, yours or someone else's. If you're caught working in sandals, you're likely to ruin them by midday anyway, or get mocked for trying to protect your feet like a pampered noble. Besides, the heat makes them slippery, and there's no band-aid if the straps cut your heels raw. You walk on, dodging a pile of donkey droppings and passing a small boy holding a bucket of clay. He's heading to the brickmaker's yard, a place you might end up too if you don't report to your assigned site in time. You nod at him, and he nods back, his face already streaked with sweat and ash. The smell changes as you move, shifting from smoke and river wind to something sharper, sun-warmed, dung-burnt straw and rotting reeds. It's not unbearable, but it lingers. You try to breathe through your mouth without choking on the dust. Every inhale carries the flavor of the path, and every step reminds you that this journey to work isn't a commute. It's a gauntlet. Soon you reach the outskirts of the village where most of the physical labor happens. There are fields in the distance, workshops here and there. But your job today is at a construction site, a small temple wall, maybe a granary extension. It doesn't matter. The task is the same haul, carry, place, repeat. Your arms are already tired, though you haven't lifted a thing. That's what the sun does. It drains you before your muscles even get a chance to work. You pause to tie your tunic tighter around your waist, tucking the frayed ends into a loose knot. You glance at your shadow already short and sharp beneath you. The sun's nearly overhead. Mainstream historical evidence shows that common laborers in ancient Egypt worked grueling hours, especially during building seasons tied to religious or civic calendars. They were organized into crews sometimes with nicknames or banners, often assigned by village leaders or temple officials. Though not technically slaves, these workers had little say in where or how they toiled. And the job security they were offered was conditional on health obedience and survival. You report to the foreman who's seated under a crude shelter made of palm fronds. His eyes skim you up and down not with concern but calculation. How useful will you be today? How long before the heat gets you? He says nothing, just gestures to the supply pile. You know the drill. You grab a crude basket woven from papyrus, its bottom patched with frayed rope. Today's first task haul gravel. Not the smooth river stones that might be used in art or mosaic, but sharp, angular chips used to level foundation work. Your job is to carry them from one end of the yard to another, over and over with no reward except not being punished. As you lift the first basket, the fibers cut into your palms. You adjust your grip, grit your teeth, and take the first steps toward the opposite wall. The path is hot, your feet sting, your back already protests. This is not symbolic labor. It's survival through repetition. Somewhere behind you, someone groans. Someone else laughs bitterly. No one's really talking. It's too early for jokes. Most workers have stuffed linen into their head wraps, trying to keep the sun from baking their brains. One man has cut slits into his tunic for extra airflow. Another has a charm tied to his wrist, a clay scarab probably meant to bring strength or protection. You have no charm, just blisters and endurance. You dump the gravel and return, again, then again, then and again. The dust kicks up with every step, mixing with sweat until your skin feels like it's coated in wet ash. You wipe your face on your sleeve, which only grinds the dust deeper into your pores. You can taste it now, earth and heat and exhaustion. The more you breathe, the more your chest starts to feel tight, like you're inhaling the desert itself. And still you go on. Historians still argue over just how brutal these conditions really were. Some point to evidence of state-sponsored support wages paid in food, occasional rest days, even medical attention. Others emphasize the skeletal remains of workers found near major sites, like Deir el-Medina, and the pyramids showing signs of arthritis, spine damage, and malnutrition. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps even the best version of this labor was still crushing. Your hands begin to cramp. Your shoulders ache. You consider asking for a pause, but you know the answer already. Breaks aren't scheduled. They're earned through seniority, good favor, or desperation. You've seen what happens to those who push too hard. A collapsed body is a liability. A delay, a problem to be moved to the side and dealt with later. Still, there are moments, fleeting ones, that give you breath. A passing cloud. A gust of wind that smells more like papyrus than dung. A distant song from a woman in a nearby field, her voice rising like incense above the groaning of the earth. You close your eyes just for a second and remember that there's a river nearby. There's cool water eventually. And maybe someone left a small bowl of figs in the shade for later. You cling to that thought. The afternoon creeps forward like melted wax. The work doesn't stop, but your body adapts. Your pace slows. Your feet shuffle instead of step. Your eyes adjust to the glare, and your hands, though raw, learn to cradle the basket without flinching. You are not building something magnificent today. You are not part of a grand monument or divine statue. You are leveling ground, hauling gravel, and trying not to fall apart before sunset. That's enough. This is the commute. This is the job. This is the cost of living beneath gods who demand stone and sweat in equal measure. And you haven't even made it to lunch. You don't realize how hot it's gotten until your vision starts to shimmer. Not from dizziness, at least not yet, but from the sheer weight of sunlight pressing down on the earth. It's no longer morning, and the light has shifted from golden to white-hot. There's no shade, no wind, and no escape. You wipe your forehead, and your hand comes back wet, the linen wrapped around your head already soaked through. You glance up briefly and regret it immediately. The sky is a polished sheet of steel, and the sun sits like a god staring straight into your skull. Noon in ancient Egypt doesn't feel like daytime. It feels like judgment, the kind of bright that makes every shadow seem unnatural and every breath feel earned. If you stand still for more than a minute, your body begins to overheat. You've stopped producing sweat not because you're dry, but because you've run out. Your shirt clings to you like wet paper, and your arms tingle with the early signs of sunburn, despite the clay you smeared on them this morning. Your skin feels hot to the touch, like you've been lying under a fire pit instead of working in the open air. This is the part of the day when most animals disappear, hiding in burrows or under leaves, anything to avoid the burning. You, on the other hand, are still out here gripping a basket and hoping the next load is lighter than the last. It won't be, you know that. But you hope anyway. Mainstream historical accounts tell us that Egyptians were deeply aware of the sun's power, not just as a source of light and heat, but as a living god. Ra, the sun deity, was both creator and destroyer. His daily journey across the sky was seen as both a gift and a test. For most people, honoring the sun meant survival timing your work, to avoid the worst hours adjusting rituals and routines around its movement. But for you, the sun doesn't care what time it is. It's simply always there, glaring, watching, judging. There's a word the scribes use, shepherd, associated with the scarab beetle, with transformation, with rebirth. The scarab rolls its ball of dung endlessly across the desert, just like Ra pushes the sun across the sky. Some days you feel like that beetle. Not because you're noble or divine, but because you too are pushing something heavy through a field of heat and sand, hoping that if you just keep moving, something good will happen. You pause to rest briefly, crouching beside a low wall. There's a little bit of shade here, not enough to cool you, but enough to trick your brain into thinking you found shelter. You breathe through your nose, slow, steady, and try not to cough. The dust in your throat has turned to paste. You wish you had more water, but you're rationing. If you drink it all now, you'll collapse by mid-afternoon. A man nearby isn't doing so well. He's crouched low, his head down, shoulders trembling. Someone calls out for help, but no one moves. Not because they don't care, but because they can't. If they stop, they'll fall too. After a few minutes, the man gets up slowly and stumbles toward a water jug. You're relieved. Not because you know him, but because you know that could have been you. There are no thermometers here, no weather apps, no health advisories. But this heat, it's probably hovering around 110 degrees Fahrenheit or more. And unlike modern dry heat, this comes with the added bonus of total exposure. There are no hats, no UV protective sleeves, no iced drinks waiting in the break room. If you're lucky, you'll find a date palm later and suck on the fruit to keep your blood sugar up. You keep moving. Your muscles scream. Your eyes burn. The kohl around your lashes has started to melt, mixing with sweat and trickling into the corners of your vision. You blink furiously, but it only makes it worse. You consider wiping your face, but the sleeve of your tunic is crusted with dirt and salt. You do it anyway. Historians still argue about how ancient Egyptians protected themselves during the hottest hours of the day. Some suggest that work crews were rotated to allow rest. Others propose that laborers worked in shorter shifts, especially during peak summer. But archaeological evidence like graffiti carved into worker huts near Deir el-Medina suggests otherwise. Jokes about collapsing from heat stroke or begging for water hint at a daily battle not just against the sun, but against human limitation itself. You reach the tool station, drop your basket, and slump beside a pile of stones. Your body feels like it's vibrating, not from pain, but from emptiness. You've reached the point where effort becomes mechanical. Lift, walk, drop, return, repeat. The foreman calls out. A new task. You're assigned to mud packing a job that sounds easy but isn't. You mix river mud with straw, using your bare hands slapping it against a wall to reinforce a structure under construction. The mud is hot, sticky, alive with insects. You don't complain. You just keep going. The sun shifts slightly in the sky. Not enough to cool you, but enough to change the shadows. You squint up and spot a vulture circling high above, gliding silently on the thermal air. It's not watching you. Not yet. But you feel its presence anyway, a reminder that everything here is fragile. A reminder that the desert doesn't need to be angry to take you. It just needs you to stop moving. You keep moving. And still the sun watches. By the time the sun begins to lean westward, it's not just your feet and back that are aching, it's your soul. Every movement feels weighted. Your clothes are soaked with sweat and stiff with salt. But if you think you've had a long day, take a moment and imagine waking up as a woman in ancient Egypt. It starts even earlier, well before sunrise. Before the sky turns lavender, before the roosters begin their ritual screaming, she is already grinding grain by hand. There's no mill, no machine, just a wide, flat stone, and a second heavier one clutched in both hands, moved back and forth until the emmer wheat is crushed into coarse flour. This motion grind, push-pull reset is repeated thousands of times every morning. It's slow. It's painful. It wears down the spine, the shoulders, the wrists. Archaeological studies of female skeletons from worker villages confirm this repetitive strain. Vertebrae, compressed knees, worn elbows, swollen. These injuries weren't rare, they were routine. And after the grain is ground, there's dough to be mixed, water to be hauled, firewood to be fetched. And that's all before her family even wakes up. You pass by one of these women, now bent low sleeves, rolled feet, braced wide as she kneads a sticky ball of dough. Her hair is tied back and sweat is already beading across her brow. Her youngest child clings to her hip, while another tugs at her sleeve. She doesn't shoo them away. She just keeps kneading. You nod silently. She doesn't look up. Ancient Egypt surprisingly granted women more rights than many other ancient civilizations. They could own property, initiate divorce, represent themselves in court, and inherit wealth. There are even records of women working as priestesses, merchants, scribes, and administrators. But those women were the exception, not the norm. For most life was brutally physical and ceaselessly domestic. After breakfast is baked and the house swept clean of the previous night's soot. And insects, the next phase begins. She must fetch water perhaps multiple times per day. This means a walk to the river or to a village cistern with heavy ceramic jugs balanced across the back or on the head. These jugs weigh dozens of pounds when full, and the path is never smooth. And once home, the water isn't for her. It's for washing clothes, scrubbing dishes, dousing the fire pit, and rehydrating the family's stash of sour mash for later meals. You stop near the communal well and watch a line of women forming, each holding a jug. Some balancing infants, others coaxing toddlers. No one complains. There's no time. A few speak softly, exchanging words beneath the drone of flies. One woman sings quietly as she walks her voice, weaving through the heat like thread through linen. The melody is old, older than the bricks in the wall beside you. You don't know the words, but you feel the weight of them. You step aside as a group passes their feet, bare dresses, dust-stained eyes forward. One glances at you briefly, tired but focused, and then she's gone, disappearing into the shimmer of afternoon. Inside most homes, women are responsible for nearly everything that sustains life. Cooking, cleaning, childcare, ritual offerings, food preparation, textile repair. If they are lucky, they'll get a few coins or rations from their husband's wages, enough to trade for saltfish or a fresh pot. If they're unlucky, they'll manage scraps in silence. There are records, actual papyri documenting women's legal disputes, dowries, property rights. One famous case from the 20th dynasty involved a woman named Naunacht, who drafted a will to disinherit certain children who she claimed had not supported her in old age. It was a rare moment of recorded agency, but Naunacht was literate and wealthy. Most women left no records, only worn bones, smooth floors, and generations of survival. You walk past a weaving hut and glance inside. Two young girls are pulling thread through a loom made of wood and stretched twine. Their movements are swift but rhythmic. One hums, the other frowns. Beside them, a stack of woven linen waits to be dyed or traded. Clothing, especially for women, was homemade, washed in river water, dyed with vegetable pigment repaired until it couldn't be repaired anymore. A single garment might last a year if cared for less, if it caught on stone or snagged during harvest. Near the back of the hut, a clay pot simmers over a fire. You can smell lentils and garlic, maybe a hint of herbs. The scent is comforting, but it doesn't hide the grit in the air or the heat pressing through the open doorway. You nod and move on, giving space to the work, to the rhythm, to the quiet determination, holding this place together. Historians still debate how much autonomy women had in practice versus on paper. Some argue that Egypt's legal structure provided genuine equality for its time. Others note that the surviving records overwhelmingly reflect elite households, not the lived experiences of village wives and daughters. What is undeniable is the labor constant, invisible, essential. As you make your way back toward the storage huts, you pass another woman older this time, bent at the waist, sweeping the floor with a bundle of date fronds tied into a broom. Her hands are cracked, her nails worn, but her strokes are even precise. She's not just cleaning. She's making the space ready for a guest, for a god, for another day. Your own hands are dirty, your face drawn, your feet sore. But you stop and watch her for a moment, letting the rhythm of her motion slow your breathing. The broom sweeps. The dust rises, then falls. She doesn't look up. She doesn't need to. She's already done this 10,000 times. Somewhere between the end of the afternoon hole and the moment you think about stopping, a dull ache begins to settle in the base of your neck. It's not sharp or sudden. It's the kind of pain that builds slowly, quietly, like sand collecting in a jar. Your fingers are tingling, your knees unstable, your breath shallower than usual. But there's no fanfare to signal that something's wrong. Just the awareness that something inside you is off. Something is failing. And in ancient Egypt, that's terrifying. Because when you get sick here, your options aren't great. There is no hospital, no nurse, no cool sheet tucked under your chin while someone checks your pulse. If you are ill, you stay home, and that home is the same hut with no airflow, no soft bedding, and certainly no disinfectant. If someone tends to you, it's a family member, maybe an elder, who knows a few healing spells. If you're fortunate, a scribe priest trained in medical scrolls might see you, but that depends on whether you're near a temple, whether your illness is dramatic enough to warrant attention, and whether you can afford the offerings required to request care. You sit under the shadow of a wall, your hands trembling slightly as you lift your water jug. It's warm. It tastes like clay. You sip anyway, forcing it down while the back of your throat burns. You close your eyes and breathe shallowly. You're not vomiting. That's good. You haven't fainted. Yet. A neighbor passes and glances your way. He says nothing, but the pause in his step is just enough to register. He knows what this looks like. You've seen it too, someone pushing too far too long under too much heat, too little rest. You wonder if he'll tell someone or just assume you'll be fine. In ancient Egypt, medical care was a fascinating blend of science, religion, and superstition. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical texts from around 1550 BCE, contains hundreds of remedies for conditions ranging from burns to intestinal parasites to wandering womb. Some of the treatments are startlingly practical. Honey, for example, was applied to wounds for its antibacterial properties. Others were less so. You remember a man last year who got bit by something, no one knew what exactly. His leg swelled, turned purple. They rubbed it with crocodile fat and recited a protective chant. When that didn't work, they added garlic, then onion, then beer. He died 3 days later. Still, belief is powerful. And even now, as you sit in the heat with your hands wrapped around your knees, you wonder if maybe a charm or spell would help. You don't have any amulets on you, those were expensive, and often passed down through generations. But maybe someone nearby does. Maybe you could borrow one just for the evening, just to see if it makes a difference. The most common cure for what you're feeling right now, heat, exhaustion, nausea, dizziness, would probably have been a poultice made from dates and resin, or a drink infused with herbs and palm wine. You've tried it before. It mostly made you sleepy. You lie back against the wall, letting the coolness of the mud bricks seep into your skin. There's no breeze, but the shade is slightly less unbearable than the open sun. You watch a hawk trace lazy circles in the sky and try not to think about dying. Because death here is close. Not in a morbid, dramatic sense, but in a practical one. People die from infection, from childbirth, from stepping on sharp tools and getting gangrene. You've seen people with swollen joints, coughing blood, bleeding from wounds that never heal. There's no anesthesia, no surgery. If you break a bone, you splint it and hope. If you can't walk, you crawl. If you're lucky, you rest and recover. If not, well, the afterlife is full of paperwork. In fact, dying in ancient Egypt wasn't just an end. It was a logistical ordeal. You'd need a proper ritual, a clean linen wrapping the correct prayers. If you didn't receive them, you risked being trapped between worlds, wandering without form or memory. You've seen old women whispering to the dead in courtyards, begging them to let go to cross over. You've heard stories of souls who lingered because their names weren't spoken or their bodies weren't properly buried. The idea that your illness could become a spiritual problem only adds pressure. You sit there thinking, if I die here, will anyone remember to include my name on the offering list? Will I get even one Shabti to work for me in the afterlife? Or will I just be another forgotten laborer, buried without ceremony, left to drift? Historians still debate whether Egyptian medicine was ahead of its time or just ritualized guesswork. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. The Egyptians understood anatomy surprisingly well. Some texts describe the heart, liver, and vessels with eerie accuracy. But their treatments were also deeply entangled with myth. Demons caused toothaches. Evil spirits twisted your intestines. The cure, often a mix of herbs, and spells. You push yourself upright. Your head throbs, but you're not ready to give up yet. At the edge of the yard, someone is preparing a poultice, mashing figs and barley into a paste, mixing it with honey and oil. It smells sweet, almost comforting. You walk slowly toward it, and the woman preparing it looks up. She doesn't ask what's wrong. She just hands you a small ball wrapped in palm fiber. For strength, she says. You take it, press it to your lips, and chew. It's sticky, rich, unfamiliar. You nod in thanks. Somewhere nearby, someone laughs. Not at you, just at something mundane and ridiculous. A goat chasing a rooster. A child falling into a basket. It doesn't matter. The sound is good. It grounds you. Because even when your body is betraying you, even when the heat is climbing and your stomach is turning and your hands won't stop trembling, there is still rhythm. There is still community. There is still the quiet faith that tomorrow will come and that maybe you'll still be here to meet it. The first time you hear about someone robbing a grave, it sounds outrageous, disrespectful, blasphemous, a sure way to earn a curse that follows you into the afterlife and makes your soul heavier than a lead brick on the scales of Ma'at. But that was before the hunger. That was before your food jar stayed empty for 3 days straight. That was before you watched your child chew on stale papyrus, not out of mischief, but out of desperation. So now when the rumor comes soft as dust on the wind that a nearby tomb hasn't been sealed properly, your ears perk up. You're not thinking about gold. You're thinking about bread, because tombs aren't just resting places. In ancient Egypt, they're stocked with offerings meant to sustain the dead in the afterlife. Loaves of bread, jars of beer cuts, of dried fish. Or fowl, sometimes preserved fruit. Sometimes even a tool or a warm blanket. Or a little pouch of salt. It's not treasure, it's lunch. And when you're starving, the afterlife can wait. Your neighbor leans in, whispering. The tomb's half collapsed, he says. Abandoned. The priest said it wasn't a noble, just a grain official. Barely anyone went to the burial. You nod slowly. You don't agree. You don't object. You just let the words hang in the air like incense smoke, too light to catch. Later, when the sun dips low and the workers drift home, you walk with no direction, except that your feet know where they're going. The necropolis lies just beyond the edge of the village rows of sandy mounds and fading stone markers, some intact, some caved in like tired lungs. The place is quiet but not silent. Lizards scuttle under stones. The wind brushes over cracked limestone. And somewhere a beetle moves steadily forward, dragging its burden toward darkness. You crouch near the base of a broken wall. Your fingers trace the faded symbols' hieroglyphs, now half swallowed by time. You don't know what they say. Maybe a prayer, maybe a warning. You whisper an apology anyway, just in case. There's no dramatic heist, no torches, no swinging blades. Just hands brushing away sand. Just a loose brick shifted aside. Just the smallest opening into a forgotten space, filled with stale air and the scent of dry rot. You don't go far, just enough to see, just enough to reach. And there it is, a sealed jar half buried beneath crumbled plaster. You lift it gently, heart racing, the clay cool in your hands. You twist the lid. Inside bread. Dry, cracked, but intact. A miracle. You sit back and close your eyes. Your stomach growls. Mainstream historical records confirm that tomb robbing was a widespread, deeply documented phenomenon in ancient Egypt. From the Old Kingdom to the New Kingdom and beyond, officials recorded arrests, trials, and even confessions from laborers and guards, who in desperate times broke into sacred tombs not for gold, but for food, cloth, and tools. One set of court documents from the 20th dynasty details the interrogations of tomb workers who admitted to prying open coffins, stripping linen, and dividing bread between families. And it wasn't always hidden. In some eras of famine or political collapse, tomb raiding became so common that local authorities looked the other way or participated themselves. The boundary between need and crime blurred quickly when survival was on the line. You remember a story told in whispers about a man named Jehutinakht, not a pharaoh, but wealthy. His tomb, found centuries later, showed signs of intrusion offerings gone linen-stripped, even bones disturbed. But it wasn't the gold that was missing. It was the flour, the dates, the jars of wine. You open your eyes and look around. No one's watching. Or if they are, they pretend not to see. You wrap the bread in a strip of cloth from your pouch. You don't cry. That would waste moisture. But your hands are shaking. You rise, step quietly away, and leave the tomb behind. Some say the gods frown on those who disturb the dead. Others say the gods understand hunger. Either way, no lightning strikes you. No demon appears. The world goes on. The sky darkens. And tonight your family will eat. Still the fear lingers, not just of divine punishment, but of human judgment. If someone finds out, will they report you? Will you be dragged before a scribe, forced to confess, branded, imprisoned, or worse, ostracized? You walk faster, heart pounding past rows of dry fields and silent huts. The air cools slightly. Stars begin to peek through the purple-blue sky. You focus on your breath. One step, then another. You tell yourself you've done nothing wrong. You tell yourself that survival is not a sin. You tell yourself that if it were you buried in that tomb, you'd want someone to take what they need. Historians still debate the moral landscape of ancient Egyptian tomb robbing. Some argue it was pure opportunism fueled by greed. Others view it as a form of desperate redistribution, stealing from the dead to feed the living. In either case, one thing is clear. The line between sacred and necessary was fragile. Back in your home, your children stir as you enter. You light a small oil lamp and place the wrapped cloth on the floor. Their eyes widen. You nod slowly. You don't explain. You don't need to. The bread is shared without question, eaten in silence. The taste, slightly sour, faintly earthy, is the taste of relief, of survival, of guilt and gratitude in equal measure. Afterward, you lie awake on your mat, staring at the roof. Dust filters down with every breeze. You wonder about the man whose bread you took. Was he kind? Was he cruel? Did he know his meal would be eaten again centuries later by someone too tired to feel shame? You say a silent prayer. One of those old ones half-remembered, the kind your grandmother used to mutter when the grain bins ran low. You close your eyes and wait for sleep. It does not come quickly. You find yourself squinting in the dim torchlight of a cramped chamber, staring at a wall that doesn't just tell a story, it decides one. That is, if you believe the ancient Egyptians. And let's be honest, you're in their house now. On the surface, hieroglyphs might look like doodles from a divine sticker book. Owl's eyes, lotus flowers, beetles, and weird little seated men. But make no mistake, this was serious business. Every line, every symbol, every little feather mattered. And if you got one wrong, well, someone's soul might wander the afterlife forever, faceless and forgotten. Talk about pressure. You blink hard. There are no vowels, no punctuation, and forget about a helpful spell check. Ancient Egyptian scribes had to memorize hundreds of these symbols, some phonetic, some conceptual, others purely decorative, and stack them like spiritual Lego to build meaning. It wasn't just about saying something. It was about invoking something. When you etched a name into stone, you were anchoring that person's soul for eternity. That meant if someone chiseled it out later, they didn't just erase your credit. They erased you. Now imagine you're a tomb painter. You're halfway through transcribing a funerary text, a protective passage from the Book of the Dead, and you sneeze. Just a tiny mistake. And instead of "May your soul rise like the sun," you accidentally say, "May your soul rot in a goat." Hieroglyphs were that fragile. One wrong reed stroke, and you weren't just embarrassing yourself. You were cursing a noble spirit to spend eternity filing ghostly HR reports in the underworld. So yeah, accuracy mattered. Here's the official historical fact. Scribes in ancient Egypt were not just bureaucrats. They were elite, highly trained professionals who often started their education as children. They were trained for over a decade in writing on papyrus and carving into stone, and were considered essential for all levels of state religion and ceremony. Without them, nothing moved, no taxes, no records, no sacred rituals. The ability to write hieroglyphs was seen as a divine gift, and scribes were exempt from most physical labor, which made their hands soft but their minds sharp. But here's the fringe tidbit. You didn't expect certain temple priests believed that the very act of writing hieroglyphs released spiritual power into the world. It wasn't enough to write health or rebirth, you had to do it right, or you risked conjuring the opposite. That's why temple inscriptions were often created during specific lunar phases or sacred times of year. The glyphs were alive in a way that made every brushstroke count. And some high priests refused to speak certain words aloud, fearing the hieroglyphs might manifest them into existence. Say plague wrong and you might cause one. Historians still debate whether the written language was more functional or mystical. Some see hieroglyphs primarily as a state tool used to track grain count cattle and glorify pharaohs. Others argue the written word held genuine supernatural weight, especially within religious rituals. After all, we've found spells inscribed on sarcophagi amulets, and even inside walls that were sealed for eternity. You don't do that for taxes. You do that to speak across dimensions. You shuffle deeper into the tomb chamber. The air thickens with old dust and dried resin. All around you, hieroglyphs snake across the walls. Rows upon rows of winged scarab solar discs, and squatting gods with bird heads and shepherd's crooks. They aren't arranged like modern writing. Egyptian script went left to right, right to left, or even top to bottom, depending on which way the little birds faced. That's right, the ducks decide the direction. It's less like reading a book and more like decoding a magical crossword puzzle built by someone who worshipped beetles. You crouch beside a painted panel following a funerary scene where the deceased is shown being weighed in the Hall of Maat. On one side of the golden scale rests the person's heart. On the other, the feather of truth. You know this moment. It's the spiritual audit. Say the wrong thing to the gods. You're crocodile bait. Scribble the wrong glyph. The feather tilts, and your soul fails the afterlife's version of two-factor authentication. Suddenly you realize something chilling the tomb you're in. It's not just for the dead. It's for the gods, too. Hieroglyphs weren't just memorials. They were contracts. They outlined what the soul was owed, what it must do, and how the deities should treat it. The Book of the Dead wasn't named because it sounded cool. It was literally a passport, filled with spells, passwords, and spiritual cheat codes for navigating the afterlife. The idea was to prepare the deceased for cosmic bureaucracy declarations of purity. I did not steal, I did not kill, I did not gossip about Thutmose's bad haircut, followed by scripted rituals and transformation prayers. It wasn't just about getting to the afterlife, it was about staying there. And you'd better hope your hieroglyphs were engraved deeply and flawlessly, because tomb robbers rival family members or angry exes could come in centuries later and chip your name off the wall. Boom, your soul gone, erased from the universe. The ancient Egyptians didn't believe in resting in peace. They believed in fighting, praying, and inscribing your way into immortality, one symbol at a time. You look around and wonder who painted these, who carved these glyphs inch by inch with reed pens, pigment made from crushed minerals and bronze chisels. Someone whose name we don't remember. That irony stings. The person who made sure Pharaoh Ramses had the right spells to dodge demon hippos in the underworld forgotten. But maybe their signature hides in a discreet corner of the tomb. A single carved owl, a clever pun, a quiet rebellion. Because despite all the pressure, some scribes snuck in jokes, personal flair, or subversive lines into royal monuments. A little snark eternalized in gold. You brush dust from your cheek. Your body is exhausted, your tongue dry, and your eyes ache from trying to read the wall. You don't even know if you're reading right to left or left to right anymore. The birds stopped helping. The more you stare, the more the glyphs shift. Lines curl, symbols blur. Maybe it's the heat, or maybe it's something older. A warning whispered through ochre and limestone. You're starting to think hieroglyphs weren't designed to be read by the living. At least not by you. They were for the gods. For the dead, for the ones who knew the true pronunciation of eternity. You're just a visitor. A sweaty, sandy, barely hydrated visitor who doesn't even know how to say water in ancient Egyptian. You're not making it to the afterlife. Not unless someone really generous carves your name right, wraps you in clean linen, and slips you a snack for the road. Good luck with that. You hear the sound before you see the source, a soft rhythmic rattling, like dry seeds tumbling inside a hollow gourd. It creeps into the silence of the desert night, riding the wind like a whisper of warning. You turn your head slowly, your ears tracking the gentle percussion until you spot her, a woman, no older than 20, barefoot, wrapped in linen, moving through the threshold of her mud brick home. She's holding what looks like a dried-out pod strung with bits of shell and bone. She shakes it with purpose, not joy. It's not music. It's protection. Because in ancient Egypt, sound wasn't just entertainment, it was weaponry. Invisible armor for an invisible world. You don't carry a sword. You carry a sistrum, a rattle shaped like an ancient ankh, or maybe a simple reed flute blessed by a temple priest. Because demons, it turns out, hate noise. Not just any noise, sacred noise, rhythmic vibrations said to repel chaos and attract order. In a land where balance ma'at was life, anything that protected harmony was treasured, including music. That's your first lesson. Instruments here are not toys. They are tools, and very often they are talismans. The sistrum, for example, wasn't played in taverns or parties. It was shaken in temples before statues of gods, and during rituals meant to cleanse a place or ward off ill spirits. You're told by a passing priest that the rattling sound it makes mimics the rustling of papyrus reeds in the wind, a sound said to comfort the goddess Hathor and scare away demonic forces. You nod politely, but deep down you're wondering if it's just an excuse to make noise in a world where silence can feel like a trap. You don't realize it yet, but the ancient Egyptians had an entire philosophy built around sound. They believed that the universe itself was born from vibration. The spoken word, the breath of a god. The original utterance that shaped the world. That's why words here have power. That's why chants and invocations aren't just muttered. They're intoned, carefully measured, and often accompanied by percussive beats to give them force. Because the divine listens not just to what you say, but how you say it, and what's behind the words. By mid-morning, you're standing in the sun-drenched courtyard of a local temple, watching a procession of musicians prepare for a purification rite. They're holding long, curved trumpets, made of copper finger cymbals, tied with linen strips and frame drums that look worn down by centuries of ritual use. These aren't entertainers. These are guardians of harmony defenders against the creeping disorder of death illness and spiritual decay. Their rhythm doesn't lift your mood, it settles your soul. The drumbeat begins slow, measured, repetitive. It's not catchy. It's heavy. Each thud of the hide is a step away from chaos, a pulse that restores the sacred rhythm of the cosmos. You feel it in your chest, in your knees, in the base of your spine. One priest walks past you, swinging a rattle like it's a blade. For Apophis, he mutters. So he doesn't come tonight. You're not sure if he's joking. Here's a historical fact. You didn't expect the sistrum was so important that even queens and high priestesses were depicted holding it in formal rituals. Some were made of precious metals, gold, silver, and bronze, and were reserved for elite religious functions. In fact, archaeologists have discovered elaborately decorated sistrums buried in tombs as if the dead might need to scare off a few demons on the way to the afterlife. According to records from the New Kingdom era, priests believed that shaking a sistrum near a mummy could wake the gods and help guide the soul through the dangerous tunnels of Duat, the Egyptian underworld. But even more humble instruments held spiritual value. The tambourine, for example, wasn't just for music. It was an oracle. It was said that during festivals, the rhythms played by temple dancers could induce prophetic visions or trance-like states, where the veil between worlds thinned. You see one such dancer now painted in ochre. Her arms raised, her feet bare and dusty, spinning slowly to the beat of the frame drum. Her eyes are closed. She's not dancing for you. She's dancing for the gods. You're handed a wooden clapper. It's shaped like a pair of open hands, and it feels odd in your grip. A local boy shows you how to use it. Strike palm against palm to imitate the sound of applause or thunder. The gods like loud noises, he says, grinning. It keeps the bad things away. He doesn't specify what those bad things are, but you've heard enough today to not ask. And here's the quirky detail. Not all instruments in ancient Egypt were played in the way you might expect. Some were worn. Some were hidden. Some were made of animal bones and played only at night. In a tomb near Thebes, archaeologists discovered what might be the world's oldest maracas. Small gourds filled with pebbles buried next to a musician. The theory the dead might need to make some noise of their own in the afterlife. Perhaps to call for help. Perhaps just to keep company. Historians still argue whether the primary role of music in ancient Egypt was religious, social, or medical. Some believe that music soothed labor pains and treated emotional illness. Others claim its use was strictly ceremonial. But the sheer volume of musical artifacts lies, harps, flutes, clappers, cymbals, and more suggests that music wasn't optional. It was embedded in daily life, woven into the very rhythm of survival. It was present at birth, in marriage, during labor, and of course at death. You start to notice the rhythms now. The way farmers chant in unison as they till the field. The way mothers sing to their babies with minor key lullabies that sound more like prayers than songs. Even the way scribes slap their styluses against wooden boards has a kind of cadence. You realize that rhythm is everywhere, and silence is suspicious. Late in the day, you visit the edge of town where a small shrine hums with music you can barely hear. Inside, a single priestess sings while playing a harp. The notes are haunting long slow, like shadows stretching across a riverbank at dusk. Her voice cracks not from lack of talent, but from intensity. The locals say this hymn is meant to mimic the weeping of Isis, goddess of mourning, who cried the Nile into being after losing her husband Osiris. Whether you believe that or not, the sound stirs something in your chest. You sit down in the dirt outside, holding your clapper. You tap it gently. Once, twice, then again. No one joins you, but you're not alone. In ancient Egypt, sound always has an audience, even if it's just the gods. You've made it through the sun, the sand, the scarab bites, and the curses. You've sidestepped dung-endured bread that could break your teeth, and even been treated with honey and hippo fat when your cough turned suspicious. But now, just when you think you've adapted to ancient Egyptian life, surprise, you're under attack. By what? Not a soldier, not a god, but by a monkey, a furious shrine-guarding, ornament-snatching monkey. You see, in ancient Egypt, animals weren't just animals. They were spiritual conduits, living embodiments of the divine, and sometimes incredibly unhinged roommates. This wasn't a pet-friendly civilization in the modern sense. You didn't have a cuddly golden retriever waiting at the door. Instead, you might share your courtyard with a sacred ibis, your bedchamber with a snake, or your roof with a baboon that screams at the sunrise. And the stakes were high because if your animal friend was sacred, mistreating it could land you in court. Or worse. Let's begin with cats because yes, the rumors are true. Egyptians adored them, not just as mouse hunters, but as manifestations of Bastet, the feline goddess of home fertility and protection. Your cat wasn't just a cat. It was an avatar of a god, a creature that purred in your lap, while simultaneously representing the divine balance of cosmic order. If your tabby knocked over a vase, you didn't scold her. You apologized. Cats were so venerated that families would mourn their death by shaving their eyebrows. That's right. Not black armbands. Not flowers. Eyebrow removal. You stumbling through ancient Egypt with your linen sticking to your sunburn, now find yourself surrounded by people with freshly shaved brows, all because their cat ascended to the afterlife. And if that cat had served in a temple, expect a full burial, complete with embalming and offerings. But don't be lulled by this feline serenity, because where cats brought grace, monkeys brought mayhem. Baboons in particular were kept by temples and elite households alike. Why? Because they were believed to be connected to Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and the moon. In murals, you'll spot them posed like tiny scribes, crouched beside papyrus scrolls or raising their hands to the sun. But in real life, they were more like drunk uncles at a wedding. These primates had tempers. They stole food, bit visitors, and could be startlingly aggressive if disrespected. There are records of baboons being trained to perform tasks like fetching items, or even mimicking human behavior. But training a baboon is like handing a toddler a spear. You never know when it's going to escalate. And if you harmed one, you weren't just dealing with a monkey, you were insulting a god. Mainstream historical fact. In places like Hermopolis, baboons were considered sacred to the extent that entire cemeteries were devoted to them, Archaeologists have found carefully mummified baboons, complete with wrappings, amulets, and tiny sarcophagi. These weren't sideshows. They were serious spiritual players. But that's just the beginning. Crocodiles. Also sacred, especially in Fayum, where the god Sobek, crocodile-headed and muscular, was honored in temples built beside lakes teeming with the real thing. People made offerings, prayed for protection, and even kept domesticated crocodiles in pools. They were adorned with jewelry, fed lavish meals, and when they died, mummified like royalty. Imagine brushing your teeth while a crocodile lounges beside your tub, wearing gold earrings. And no, you don't get to ask it to move. Still feeling confident, let's move to snakes. The uraeus, the rearing cobra, is one of ancient Egypt's most iconic symbols, often seen on pharaohs' crowns. It wasn't just decorative. Egyptians believed that the cobra was a guardian capable of spitting fire at enemies. In real life, cobras were feared and revered, sometimes kept in sacred enclosures, or associated with specific deities like Wadjet. But if one slithered into your home, you didn't kill it. You whispered prayers and offered milk, hoping it would leave on peaceful terms. Then there were scarabs, those chunky beetles that now decorate your neighbor's pendant. In ancient Egypt, the scarab symbolized rebirth and transformation, linked to the god Khipri, who pushed the sun across the sky each day, much like the beetle rolls its dung. Some Egyptians kept scarabs in tiny cages, or wore them as living amulets. You, on the other hand, may be screaming, because one just crawled into your linen. But remember, it's sacred. Try not to crush the divine with your sandal. Let's not forget birds. The ibis, long-legged and slightly smug, was sacred to Thoth, and temples often kept flocks of them in sanctuaries. Likewise, hawks and falcons were linked to Horus, the sky god. Wealthy households might keep one tethered in a shaded aviary, treated with reverence and care. Even geese had symbolic value, though your experience with them will likely involve hissing, biting, and regret. Here's a quirky tidbit. Wealthy Egyptians occasionally kept exotic pets imported from other regions like lions. Yes, actual lions. Pharaohs and high priests sometimes maintained private menageries, filled with animals from Africa and beyond, kept as symbols of divine power and control over nature. These weren't cuddly zoo displays. These were roaring reminders that their owners held dominion over life and death. You're just trying not to get eaten on the way to fetch water. But not all animals were honored equally. Rats, for example, were never sacred, but they were persistent. You likely share your hut with several, especially if you live near a grain store or bakery. While cats kept them somewhat in check, most Egyptians accepted that rats were part of life. The same went for insects. Flies, fleas, and lice made daily existence itchy and frustrating. Your options for pest control: smearing oils, burning herbs, or praying. Spoiler, none of it worked consistently. Scholarly debate still rages over how many of these animals were truly domesticated in the modern sense. Were baboons truly pets, or more like ceremonial animals kept in controlled captivity? Did temple crocodiles live peacefully, or were they chained and miserable? Some archaeologists argue that mummified animals were raised specifically for ritual sacrifice. Entire breeding facilities, producing cats, ibises, and other creatures solely for spiritual purposes. Others suggest genuine affection and mutual coexistence. Either way, the line between pet and deity was always blurred. And then there's the matter of animal mummification. It wasn't just reserved for sacred creatures. Pet dogs, monkeys, birds, and even fish have been found embalmed and entombed beside their owners. In some cases, they were believed to accompany their humans into the afterlife. In others, they served as offerings to the gods. Either way, preparing a monkey corpse with care incense and linen wraps requires a certain emotional and spiritual investment. Let's not overlook donkeys, the unsung heroes of ancient labor. They hauled bricks, transported grain, and occasionally stood in as very confused babysitters. While not worshipped, they were respected for their endurance. You may not offer prayers to your donkey, but you certainly rely on it when hauling goods through the blistering sun. By now you've realized something unsettling. Every creature around you, great or small, is either sacred symbolic or subtly plotting your demise. Your house isn't a home. It's a zoo with divine consequences. You can't swat the fly buzzing your ear because it might be an omen. You can't shoo the cat because it might be Bastet. You can't scream at the monkey on your roof because it might have powerful friends in high places. Even death doesn't offer relief. The Book of the Dead contains references to animal spirits, some guiding you toward judgment, others devouring you if you fail the feather test. In your tomb you may find statues of cat's jars bearing the heads of falcons and scrolls filled with spells invoking the protective power of sacred animals. It's a Noah's Ark of divine bureaucracy. And yet this reverence wasn't just about fear. It was about connection. Egyptians believed the divine was everywhere in the wind, the stars, the river, and yes, the creatures that crawled, soared, and slithered through daily life. These animals weren't background noise. They were co-authors of your fate. So as you swatted another mosquito and wiped baboon dung from your tunic paws, you are surrounded by gods, not marble statues or abstract symbols, but living, breathing creatures whose moods might determine your destiny. And while you're just trying to make it through another day, without getting bitten, scratched, or cursed, remember every hiss, chirp, and purr might just be the voice of the divine. You glance into a shard of polished bronze, your only mirror, and your reflection stares back with smudged coal eyes, lips tinted with crushed carmine, and a soft sheen of perfumed oil on your cheeks. You've followed all the rituals, dabbed the ointments, powdered your face like the noble ladies do. But here's the catch, you're slowly poisoning yourself. You don't know it, of course. To you, the burn on your eyelid isn't mercury, it's beauty. To you, the sweet, musky scent under your arms isn't lead-based paste, it's divine elegance. But to a modern physician, it's a one-way ticket to organ failure. In ancient Egypt, beauty wasn't optional. It was religious, it was political, and it was personal. The gods themselves were beautiful statues of Hathor. Goddess of love glowed with cosmetic perfection. Pharaohs wore makeup. Priests shaved every hair on their body. Even laborers found ways to decorate their skin with protective pigments. When the sun lashed down like an angry god, you, like everyone else, are expected to participate in this culture of ornament. Because in Egypt, beauty wasn't just admired. It was a kind of spiritual armor protection allure, and status all packed into a palette of natural poisons. Your daily routine starts with black coal eyeliner made from powdered galena, a mineral rich in lead. You mix it with animal fat or oil, maybe from a goose or crocodile, then apply it carefully using a slender wooden stick. It darkens your eyes dramatically, yes, but that wasn't the only point. The thick pigment also shielded your eyes from the blinding desert sun, and so people believed from the evil eye and desert spirits. That dual purpose, practical and spiritual, defined almost everything in the Egyptian beauty arsenal. Next, you dip into green malachite powder, vivid and luminous, made from crushed copper ore. You smear it along your lids, giving you the sacred look of Hathor herself. Green symbolized regeneration and fertility, linked to the god Osiris, who wore the hue of rebirth. Malachite makeup wasn't just for flair. It was supposed to ward off illness and bad omens. Yet copper in large quantities can damage the kidneys. You're layering your face in mineral medicine and alchemical danger. You do it gladly. Looking divine, after all, might keep you alive, or at least liked. Your cheeks are softened with red ochre. You grind the iron-rich earth into a fine dust and mix it with animal oil to create blush. The effect is warming, ruddy, healthful. Your lips, too, are stained a deeper red with crushed carmine beetles or other mineral pigments, depending on what's available. In wealthier households, imported resins and exotic scents are added, frankincense, myrrh, or even imported cinnamon oil from the land of Punt. These aren't merely perfumes. They are status in liquid form. You know a woman's rank by how she smells when she enters a room. But these applications are not without pain. The lead in the coal can leach into your skin, accumulate in your body, and lead to fatigue, headaches, or worse. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians fully understood the dangers of their ingredients. Some believe they noticed the symptoms but attributed them to curses, or bad air, not cosmetics. Others suggest they had an intuitive sense of danger, using these substances in moderation, or balancing them with ritual purification. Either way, you don't know. You keep applying. Your hair, if you're fortunate to have any left, is coated in thick oils, castor moringa or sesame meant to protect against sun damage and lice. You comb through it with a forked wooden pick often dipped in resin, or scented grease. If you're wealthy, your wig is made of human hair, or palm fiber intricately braided and perfumed with blue lotus oil. But keeping it in place means applying beeswax or animal fat, which melts in the heat. You spend your day reapplying, readjusting, and praying it doesn't attract flies. Spoiler, it does. To deal with body odor, you slather your underarms with a paste of crushed carob pods and goat fat. It works, sort of. The scent is sweet and earthy, but after a few hours under the merciless sun, you start to smell like a funeral offering. Ancient deodorant was a gamble. Some used ground sycamore bark. Others relied on perfumed cones, small waxy domes worn on the head that melted slowly, releasing fragrance. You might wear one to a feast and end the evening with a sticky waterfall running down your face. Beauty has its costs. Men are no exception. Scribes wear makeup. Soldiers line their eyes. Even tomb workers take time to oil their skin and style their hair with care. A clean body was not just aesthetic, it was ethical. Ritual purity was essential, especially if you were entering a temple, writing sacred texts, or preparing the dead. Unwashed skin was considered spiritually vulnerable, so you cleanse. And if you can't bathe, you anoint. Even the dead wore makeup. Mummies have been discovered with preserved eyeliner, lip pigment, and body scent. Mortuary cosmetics weren't vanity, they were armor for the afterlife. When you appear before Osiris for judgment, you better look good. You walk through the market and catch glimpses of others' women, with carefully painted faces, men with shaved heads glistening with oil. You spot a noblewoman lifting her veil slightly to reveal eyebrows painted in thick arched lines. Not her real brows, those were plucked off entirely. The painted version made from soot and minerals is bolder, more dramatic, more divine. Brows frame the soul. No pressure. Further down, you pass a perfumer's stall. It's a dizzying blend of scent and smoke heating resin. Rose petals, henna powder. The perfumer grinds, stirs, hums a hymn to Hathor as he prepares a vial of sacred oil. You know this is expensive, something only elites afford regularly. You reach for something cheaper, a cone of unguent made from cow fat and crushed lotus. It'll do. For now. Back home, you prep for a social gathering, a rare evening escape. You reapply your eyeliner, line your lips, and smear a bit of colored clay onto your temples. Your neighbor borrows a pinch of natron to whiten her teeth. Natron, the same substance used in embalming. Slightly abrasive, salty, and unpleasant. But white teeth mean power. You both grin and admire your effort. Neither of you considers that natron erodes enamel. Beauty, after all, isn't always meant to last. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian cosmetic recipes have been found on papyrus scrolls and temple walls, complete with ingredient lists and ritual prayers. These recipes often included galena malachite, red ochre, and animal fats. Some scholars believe the act of applying makeup was a daily sacred ritual, one that aligned the body with Mayat, the principle of cosmic balance. Quirky detail. Certain high-status individuals even had dedicated cosmetic servants, beauty assistants responsible for storing, preparing, and applying products. Imagine someone shadowing you all day with a palette and a feather brush whispering, "Your eyeliner is uneven, my lady." As the evening unfolds, you sit among flickering oil lamps and the soft strum of a harp. You sip wine from a clay goblet, its rim marked by your crimson lips. Around you, others shimmer in moonlight faces, glowing with a blend of sweat oils and powdered minerals. Beauty here is a shared language. No one looks untouched. Every cheek is painted, every eye shadowed, every neck scented. In the glow of flame and fragrance, you all look immortal. But your body tells a different story. Your skin, once resilient, now feels thin, irritated, burned beneath layers of pigment. You scratch at a rash blooming beneath your kohl. Your vision blurs slightly, not from age, but from exposure. What you believed was divine enhancement is now slow deterioration. But it's impossible to stop. Not just because you want to look good, but because you have to. A bare face is a breach of etiquette, a spiritual misstep, a mark of disorder in a culture obsessed with ritual cleanliness and cosmic balance. Historians still debate how aware Egyptians were of the risks. Some evidence suggests they valued aesthetics more than longevity. Others point to priests and physicians who may have recognized harmful effects, but saw them as necessary sacrifices. In either case, beauty endured. It was stitched into identity, painted across gender, worn by rich and poor alike. You lie down to sleep, cheeks still warm from application, the scent of lotus and resin clinging to your linen. Tomorrow you'll reapply. Tomorrow you'll chase the same glow. Because in ancient Egypt, beauty wasn't skin deep. It was sacred, lethal, and inevitable. You think you're done for the day? Body-aching face dusted with lead-based cosmetics feet, sore from walking barefoot on sun-baked gravel. But ancient Egypt always has more in store. Tonight, you're not heading to a soft mattress with fresh sheets and a phone charger. No, tonight you're thinking about your future. Not tomorrow, not next week, but your eternal future. Because here in this ancient world, where death is just the beginning, you have homework to do, preparing for your afterlife workforce. You probably assumed you'd get to rest in peace. Not quite. In Egypt, the rich didn't just plan for a peaceful death. They planned for productivity after death. Enter the Shabtis, small figurines often made from clay wood or faience shaped like mummified humans holding tiny tools. Their job to do your chores for you. Forever. They were expected to answer roll call in the field of reeds, an idealized version of Egypt's fertile farmlands in the afterlife. Got summoned by Osiris to dig ditches. Your Shabti would say, "Here I am." It even said so literally. Many figurines were inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead that gave them voice and duty. Imagine if every errand you dreaded in life came back to haunt you in eternity, but this time you could delegate it to your personal terracotta intern. And so begins your night not with sleep, but with sculpting. If you're poor, your Shabti is crude, maybe even homemade, a little lopsided, missing an arm. That's okay. The gods aren't picky about artistry, but they are particular about obedience. So long as the spell's carved correctly and the tools are included, your mini-minion should report for duty when the cosmic foreman calls. Mainstream historical fact Shabti figures were standard burial items for Egyptians from the Middle Kingdom onward, often numbering in the hundreds for elites. Some tombs have been found with entire armies of Shabtis, each carved with different roles, plowing irrigating measuring grain, or acting as overseers with whips. These figures were viewed not as symbolic ornaments, but as real functional replacements for labor in the afterlife. Now back to your little workshop, hunched over in candlelight, with a knife and a prayer. You carve a rough face, then scratch in the hieroglyphs. Spelling matters here, forget a line, and your Shabti might end up mute. Or worse, disobedient. And nobody wants to be the soul in the afterlife who's stuck digging canals because their helper figurines failed their initiation test. You've heard the stories. Shabtis that refused to rise. Shabtis that accidentally obeyed other souls because of mislabeling. One tale even tells of a nobleman whose entire fleet of figures turned against him, arguing in the divine court that they were overworked and mistreated. Did that really happen? Who knows? But in a world where writing preserves your soul and statues walk among the dead, you don't take chances. Quirky detail. Some Shabtis were made of wax, a material that melts in heat, softens in damp tombs, and yet, according to some magical texts, had the power to transform quickly if needed. Flexible figurines for flexible souls. You wrap your latest Shabti in cloth and tuck it into your preparation box, alongside amulets left over natron and a small copy of spell 6 from the Book of the Dead, just in case. You've made 5 figures so far, enough to handle simple farm duties, but not quite enough for estate management. You'll need more. But you also wonder, what if they unionize? It's almost funny, really, how much your afterlife looks like your current life, just with more bureaucracy. You still have to work the fields, report to supervisors, keep your spiritual passport in order. The difference in death you outsource. If you're rich enough, your tomb includes a small army of Shabti's 365 workers and 36 overseers, 1 for every day of the year, and 1 boss for each week. That's right, even your spiritual interns have middle management. And unlike the gods, these figurines don't require prayers or offerings, just careful preparation. Their uniforms are standardized arms, crossed tiny hoes in hand, sometimes even little baskets for grain. They wear the same pleated kilts, the same solemn expression. The magic is in the repetition. More Shabtis meant more labor coverage, and more coverage meant more peace of mind. You could rest in peace knowing you wouldn't be personally digging ethereal ditches in the afterlife's bureaucratic farm system. Scholarly debate. Egyptologists still argue about whether Shabtis were truly seen as animate magical beings or merely symbolic stand-ins. Some believe only high-ranking officials believed in their literal animation. Others argue that belief in their functionality was widespread among all classes, even if the quality varied. But what about those who couldn't afford a full workforce? You visit a neighbor, an older widow with 1 surviving Shabti figure, carved from sun-baked clay. It's chipped, its features faded. She says it was made by her son before he died young. There's no spell on it, no tools, just a name scratched on the back, and yet she still tucks it beneath her bed mat each night. He'll know what to do, she tells you with conviction. He always helped me in life. He'll help me there too. That's when you realize it's not always about magic. It's about memory labor and love compressed into a figure that will last longer than your bones. Meanwhile, the elite take it further. Royal tombs include dozens, sometimes hundreds of Shabtis, many personalized with titles like Chief Field Worker of Osiris or Water Carrier of the Great West. Overseers often held whips made of carved wood or were painted with tiny tattoos that signified authority in the fields of reeds. One tomb even included a Shabti with exaggerated muscles, as if strength could be sculpted into stone. You try making one like that. Bigger arms, broader chest. Your cousin laughs. What are you doing? Building a bodyguard. You shrug. Maybe I'll need one. As the moon reaches its zenith, you clean your tools and count your figurines. 10 now. Not enough, but better than none. You wonder how long they'll last in your tomb. Will someone steal them? Will they crumble? Will the ink fade from their inscriptions? You don't know. But you whisper over each one as though breath alone might keep them bound to your will. Tomorrow you'll work on your Book of the Dead. Tonight you just hope your little army remembers your name. In the days that follow, you refine your craft. You study better hieroglyphs, trade oil for brighter faience glaze, and barter with a scribe for the correct spell incantation. It's not enough to sculpt a body, you have to give it instructions. That's what spell 6 from the Book of the Dead is for. It tells the figurine exactly what to do and when. Without it, your Shabti is just a doll. One evening, as the stars spill across the sky like shattered pottery, you sit near the Nile with your box of completed workers. The reeds rustle gently. A hippo bellows in the distance. You think about death, not as an end, but as a shift. A promotion, maybe, if the gods favor you, if your heart is light, if your Shabtis obey. You close your eyes and imagine it stepping into the field of reeds, a mirror image of Egypt, only greener kinder, and less sandy. You see yourself beneath a sycamore tree, sipping cool water, as your figurines labor in your name. They till the fields. They harvest. They sing. You are no longer a peasant. You are a foreman of your own eternity. But then comes doubt. What if you misspelled a word? What if a rat chews through your spell scroll before burial? What if your tomb collapses and your workers are buried beneath rubble deaf to Osiris's call? You shake off the worry. You've done your best. You've prepared. In a world where nothing is guaranteed, not health, not rain, not justice, this is the one thing you could control. And you did. Mainstream historical fact excavations at Deir el Medina and other worker villages have uncovered Shabtis in both elite tombs and modest graves, indicating a widespread belief in their use across classes. Shabtis were typically buried alongside other grave goods, such as amulets, scarabs, food offerings, and Book of the Dead excerpts. In time, you gather your final army, 32 Shabtis each carved by your own hand. A few are crude, a few are elegant. All bear your name. You wrap them in linen, whisper a prayer to Anubis, and place them into a reed box sealed with beeswax. The lid fits snugly. It smells faintly of incense and clay. You carry the box to your burial niche, heart steady. Later that night, you dream of them waking miniature guardians, rising silently in a golden field, stretching their limbs, lifting tiny hoes. One of them turns to you and nods. We are ready. By the time the sun finally stops trying to kill you, your body feels like it's been slow roasted by Ra himself. The linen clinging to your skin is no longer clothing. It's a damp, gritty wrap of survival. Your sandals, if you're lucky enough to have them, are fraying. If not, your feet are raw from hot sand pebbles and the stray animal bone. And still the day isn't done. You're expected to contribute. Rest isn't something peasants or artisans get as a right. It's something earned in scraps. If you were building tombs today, you might be hauling limestone slabs up ramps for hours without shade. If you were weaving linen, your hands would be raw from thread and your lungs full of flax dust. If you were a priest, you'd still be standing chanting rituals for the dead voice cracking from repetition. You, though, you're just trying not to pass out. Evening rituals begin as the light dims. People gather by the river to wash, not for comfort, but for spiritual purification. Cleanliness wasn't a luxury, it was tied to order, or Mayat, the sacred balance of the universe. Egyptians bathed regularly using natron salt or lye soap, even if water access was limited. But this isn't a quiet soak in a tub. It's more like rinsing with one hand while swatting away mosquitoes with the other, trying to avoid being bitten or cursed by lurking spirits. You clean what you can, ignoring what you can't. And then you return home. Dinner is not the feast you might imagine when thinking of kings and gold. No roast duck. No honey-drenched figs. You're lucky if you have a leftover hunk of bread harder now than it was this morning, and maybe some lentils or onions. Beer again is warm and thick. It helps dull the headache from sun exposure, or at least replaces it with a different one. Families eat quietly. Children fall asleep on mats or dirt floors, and no one speaks of the next day just yet. You all know it will come far too soon. The sky deepens into a navy velvet pierced by stars so old they may have looked down on Imhotep himself. You lie down on your mat and feel every joint complain. The straw pokes your skin through the linen like tiny accusations. The ceiling of your home, a mixture of mud brick, palm wood, and wishes, creaks with the breeze. Maybe tonight there won't be sandstorms. Maybe the scorpions will stay outside. Maybe nothing bites. But your rest, like most things in ancient Egypt, is conditional. Outside, a dog barks once, then goes silent. You think of Anubis, god of the dead, with the head of a jackal wandering graveyards. You remember the stories your grandmother whispered about souls who didn't pass judgment, who wandered forever in the shadowlands clutching at the ankles of the living. You pull the linen tighter and close your eyes as if that will help. You dream, but it's not restful. You're in the hall of Mayat again, You're standing before 42 judges listing sins you didn't commit and hoping you remembered all the right words. You forgot one. The scale tips. The feather wins. Your heart is heavy. You wake with a gasp. Just a dream. Or maybe not. Historically, the concept of judgment in the afterlife was central to ancient Egyptian religion. The Book of the Dead. A collection of spells and incantations often accompanied burials to help the soul navigate the perils of Duat the underworld. The final test. Your heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If heavier, your soul was devoured by a crocodile-lion-hippo hybrid. No second chances. Game over. But not everyone could afford a proper burial or even a scroll of protection. Many commoners hoped for kindness from the gods, burying loved ones with modest charms, simple prayers, or even a clay amulet shaped like a Shabti. These little figurines were carved or molded to act as servants in the afterlife, plowing fields or carrying water. So your spirit wouldn't have to. Think of them as your eternal interns. No pay, no lunch break, just infinite loyalty. One quirky fact, some tombs had dozens or even hundreds of Shabtis won for every task the deceased might face in the next world. Wealthy individuals commissioned personalized ones, inscribed with names, roles, and even little tools in their tiny hands. Meanwhile, poor families often buried a single crudely made Shabti, or none at all. Even in death class mattered. Historians still debate how widely this belief in functional afterlife labor was held among common Egyptians versus elites. Some argue it was more symbolic than literal, while others believe that for many the afterlife wasn't abstract, it was practical. You needed food workers, shelter, and protection, just like here. The moon hangs high now. Night in Egypt is not cool, but it's forgiving. You hear the creak of the date palms, the flutter of a bat's wing, a distant chant from a temple priest still performing evening rites. You wonder if that priest is tired too. But he'll finish before you sleep, because the gods never wait. You shift on your mat. You itch. Maybe from fleas. Maybe from guilt. You remember today. You remember the moment the sun cracked your eyes open, the blister forming on your heel, the coughing fit you had after inhaling dust while fetching water. You remember laughing once near the bread oven when someone tripped and dropped a clay jug. It shattered. They swore. You all laughed like the world wasn't on fire. But it is. It always has been. And still they endured. The Egyptians built pyramids with no cranes. They mapped stars without telescopes. They created a writing system so poetic and dense that modern scholars still struggle to translate it fully. They mummified bodies in a process that could take 70 days. They aligned temples to the solstice and synchronized farming to the Nile's moods. They did all of this while dealing with heat war, famine plague, and political collapse. They lasted over 3,000 years. You lasted one day. But there's no shame in that. In fact, it gives you perspective. You didn't time travel to prove your strength. You came to witness theirs. And now that the sun has set and the dust has settled, you carry something heavier than exhaustion. You carry admiration, not just for kings and queens, but for the ordinary, the unknown farmer, the linen weaver, the fish seller by the Nile, the woman grinding grain while balancing a baby on her hip, the child scraping clay into molds, the man who never saw a pyramid but built the brick that supported it. Their stories rarely survive, but their effort echoes in every painted wall, every funerary figurine, every cracked but sacred pot unearthed millennia later. And here you are. You came to ancient Egypt to see if you could last. Instead, you found out why they did. As the last echoes of ancient Egypt settle into silence, you find yourself surrounded by stillness. The sun that once scorched your skin has long dipped below the desert horizon, replaced by a sky dusted in quiet stars. Their soft shimmer reflects across the Nile like threads of gold trailing across water. Somewhere in the reeds a frog croaks gently, nature's lullaby in a world where gods once spoke through storms and silence alike. You take one last breath of this imagined past, its air dry but oddly comforting. The weight of the day, the sweat, the sand, the sounds. All of it fades like footprints along the riverbank. You didn't last the full 24 hours, but you walked far enough to see something timeless. You saw a civilization not defined by comfort, but by belief. Not by speed, but by precision. Not by ease, but by endurance. You let the past go now. You leave behind crocodile dung and sunburned shoulders, and bread with more grit than grain. You leave behind the great halls of judgment, the feather of Maat and the heart you carried into the afterlife. Tonight that heart is light, empty of burdens, full of stories. Sleep finds you slowly, gently, like the cool hush of desert wind beneath a canopy of stars. Let it in. Let it carry you away from stone and sand and sun. Let it drift you into dreams shaped like pyramids, and quiet echoes of a world that still whispers beneath the dust. Egypt is still watching, but tonight it lets you rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.